Welcome to Two Guys on a Porch, or in this case, two guys in front of a fireplace. Stick around to the end and you'll find out which U.S. president was married at this mantel. And find out what we're drinking today because it's not bourbon.
Welcome to Two Guys on a Porch, or in this case, two guys in front of a fireplace. I'm Jason. This is Bradford. Of course, we have my hunting dog, Kimber, with us. It's cold outside, so we are here again at the Standard Club. Thank you to Josh Smith for allowing us to have the episode here in the Standard Club. The nice thing about the Standard Club, there's all sorts of neat spots in the club to have events, and here we are.
Yeah, and so today we're filming in front of the mantel that was used in a significant remarriage. And we're in a ballroom that was built in 1895 in a private residence. I mean, that's remarkable. It happens to coincide that year with the completion of the Biltmore, which was George Vanderbilt II's home over in Nashville, North Carolina, just the largest private residence in the country to this day. We're heading toward the end of the Gilded Age, so this matches that theme perfectly. And we'll talk about the mantle we're sitting in front of as we move forward, but, in keeping with the theme of our topic today, which is the decline of alcohol consumption, we've given up on bourbon.
Yes, and so... we're expanding horizons. We're going on a field trip. We got this great campaign furniture from Jay Greenwood, jgreenwoodleathers.com. He's built these travel stuff for us, the campaign chairs, the table, the whiskey chest. And so we're putting it to use, right? We're going on field trips. And while we're putting it to use, why not try something else other than bourbon? So today we're drinking Scotch.
Absolutely. And we are smoking Don Pepin cigars. This is a My Father branded cigar, and these are provided to us. Shout out to Eric Parkinson, who is the regional rep for My Father. And I met him at the Mission Cigar and Social the first time I went there to talk to Monty Collins about utilizing their space to film, and that really has become the place of choice for us to procure our cigars. So thanks to Eric for providing these. We wanted to make sure we gave him a shout out, and we'll talk a little bit about these cigars. My Father makes a fantastic line, top to bottom. And then we are going to get into just an amazing and perhaps the most recognizable name in Scotch, and that being Macallan.
Yeah, go big or go home. I mean, so, life is short. Drink good Scotch or bourbon.
Yeah.
So we did it big here. Macallan is the most recognized name, I would say.
Yeah, and, this being our season 2, if you will, for those of you that have been paying attention, if we were to check the boxes of what we wanted to do, and I would say first on that list was, let's make sure we drink good whiskey.
Yes.
We've done that.
Check.
Without fail.
And we're continuing to do that. It's an ongoing adventure.
And we, smoke great cigars, which we've done, and in a couple of cases provided by people. This was wonderful in that regard. And most importantly, just the time to spend together.
Indeed. That, again, is the birth of this whole podcast or a whole endeavor. It was to, hey, we enjoy hanging out with each other and talking about life. So, again, go to twoguysonaporch.com. I almost forgot our name there for a second. I put an in there.
That's because we're sitting in front of a fire.
Yeah, it's hard to be all formal when this is an informal event. So go to twoguysonaporch.com, like, subscribe, put in your emails, and become part of our group because we would love to have you here on the porch with us. But the whole idea is us guys just sitting on a porch talking about life. In this case, in front of a fireplace because it's cold outside. But what a wonderful place the Standard Club is. We talked about it last episode, but this is a club. You can come here to have dinner, but you can also join the club, and it's got these wonderful spaces here. This is another one of those spaces. This is their ballroom. You mentioned it before. This ballroom was the first ballroom in Nashville. It was the Jewish Men's Club here in Nashville. They built it as the first ballroom in Nashville. They outgrew the space and they moved on. That new club that they formed is something called Old Natchez Club, a golf club, and it's still here today. So if you live here in Nashville, you probably know about that. But this is the original version of that. Now with the Standard Club, and that's how the name came about. The Jewish Men's Club that was here was called the Standard, and so that name has stuck. But yeah, you can come to the Standard Club and enjoy this great space. We've had events here. They hold events here. It's a good spot.
Absolutely, and they've been very welcoming to us. And as we embark on tasting some amazing scotches today, so. Let's talk a little bit about the fact that Macallan is the most recognizable, and some people criticize it for that, they are not particularly adventurous. They do one thing, and there are others that are better, and that may be true. But, man, what they do very well. And we've got really the top of the heap in terms of what Macallan has to offer. Now, having said that, the most expensive whiskeys in the world are super aged premium scotches, 50-year, 60-year, that exist out there that are sold at auction for $50,000, $60,000.
Yep.
And so we don't have quite that premium, but we do have rare cask, 18-year, 25-year, and 30-year. Macallan is from Speyside. It's a Speyside Scotch. Which is most noted. It's a lighter Scotch. It does not have what most people think as the peat flavor. That's going to be more of an Islay region. There are 5 distilling regions.
Islay?
Islay. Isn't that right?
No, we're in the South. It's Islay here in the South. If you're in Scotland, it's Islay. But here in the South, it's Islay. Islay. Is he laying down? Yes, he is laying down. So it's Islay. But I'm messing with you. Islay is their correct pronunciation, but a good Southern boy would call it Islay.
So. Speyside, which is where Macallan is from, is one of those 5 recognized distilling regions, and they are protected by the government. It's defined by the Scottish government for those protected distilling regions. So there's Speyside, which Macallan is the most significant representative of. Islay, which is your more peated scotches, which most people think of, and they go, "Oh, I don't like Scotch," because that's what they're thinking of.
Yeah.
You've got Highlands, which is the largest distilling region, the most variations in flavors, Lowlands, and then Campbellton. Campbellton's the smallest region, generally the least regarded because they overproduced 100 years ago and made really bad Scotch, and so it fell out of favor. There are really only a couple that are existing now in that region.
And I was going to point out, for the longest time, I thought Macallan was a Highland Scotch because on the bottle,
that's right,
it says Highland. So it's a little deceptive of what they are.
It absolutely is. They are a Speyside Scotch. And most Scotches, this is a good example, are between 80 and 86% alcohol. There's some that are higher proof, 40 to 43% alcohol, 80 to 86 proof. These that we're tasting today are all 86 proof. So that is one of their signatures, as is all scotches. Scotch, we've talked about what makes bourbon. When can you call it a bourbon? 2 years. It has to be aged in a barrel. Scotch has to be 3.
French oak barrels, right?
For Scotch?
Well, no, I'm sorry, for bourbon.
For bourbon has to be new white oak.
White oak
barrels. For Scotch, they don't have that categorization, but they Macallan and most Speysides are noted for aging in sherry cask. That came about because Spain, which produces most of the sherry, or did 300 years ago, would ship their sherry to England in casks. And when those were emptied and bottled, they thought, well, let's use them. So they put Scotch in there.
Yeah.
And so that's why you get what usually is a really pleasant profile, because unlike bourbon, which has a mash bill of combination of corn and malted barley and rye and wheat, there are 3 ingredients that make up Scotch: malted barley,
peat,
water, and yeast.
Yeah.
That's it. That's it. So,
and the peat comes in, so the dirt taste.
yes, that burned dirt taste.
Yeah, burned dirt, because it literally, I mean, peat is just their version of charcoal, right? They used it to dry out the barley. They would burn peat, and that's what I mean by their version of charcoal. It was the decomposed organic material that they made fires with, and you got to dry out the barley. And so how you dry it out? You put it over a fire and dry it out. What was the fire made of? Peat.
Yeah.
And that peat gives the smoke from the peat gives it that flavor.
It infuses into the water itself.
Yeah. And that's why when you're drinking, not necessarily the spice side, but other versions, you just taste liquid dirt. I mean, you're like, you might as well put some mud in a glass, stir it up, and drink it. You really taste the dirt in there.
And there's plenty of those that I enjoy. Talisker makes a great Scotch.
No, I didn't mean it demeaning. It's just the characteristic of it.
Yes. And some, I mean, there's one that's a blended Scotch called Peat Monster, too much.
Yeah.
But Oban is, to me, probably the best example of a lightly peated that is just, it drinks so good. So, we've talked about it enough. Do you want to start tasting?
Oh, absolutely. Well, I guess before we get into that, we ought to talk more about the cigar. That's typically our format. Admittedly, when I first started toking on this thing, I didn't like it. It had a full force front, but it's now quite mellowed out.
Yeah, and I would say this is a really good medium-bodied cigar.
Yeah. So it's almost has a little bit of a sweet taste to it. I'll give it that.
Yeah, and in talking to Eric, he said really what the My Father line tries to do is make an approachable cigar for everyone. And so through their various lines, that's exactly what they do. And I think you're right. The finish is sweet.
Yeah.
And which is really cool for a medium body. You don't typically have that.
Well, and it's surprising. Most cigars don't have that type of finish to it. But it's a very pleasant, sweet finish to it.
Yeah, so let's start with the rare cask. And this is one of Macallan's non-age statement whiskeys. And they started doing that because the demand became so high for Scotch. Now, it has declined because the tariffs put on during Trump's first term drove the price of Scotch through the roof.
But, of course, they lowered the prices when the tariffs came off.
Oh, of course they did not.
Just like gas prices. The gas prices don't come down either.
And as a result, Scotch is on average twice the price of bourbon now. It used to be very comparable, and now it's twice as much just for your basic bottle. And you can go into any store, you can find Macallan's 12-year. They do a double finish. They do an oak cask along with a sherry to give it a different flavor profile, which is exceptional. I mean, their 12 years is fantastic. But we're getting into their higher end, and so there's not anything we're drinking that's not $1,000 or more.
So, and they have so many iterations, it's hard to, you could do multiple episodes on their different iterations. Yeah. This is just our first foray into this. One characteristic, though, that's common throughout their iterations is the sherry cask aging. And because of that, it gives it a darker amber color. As I look at it, this is darker than so this rare cask, this is the first one I have.
Yeah.
Even though it's not been aged as long as the other ones, it still is a darker color than your typical bourbon. It has that sherry imbues upon it a darker color.
Yeah, and if you were to put this in front of me with a bourbon, I don't know that I could distinguish between the two. Where normally between Scotch and bourbon I could, but because of the sherry, it has that sweetness to it, which is a bourbon note for sure. Because it's got a very pleasant nose. You detect that sweetness of the sherry.
Yeah, it's The nose has a rose-like smell to it, floral, I guess you would call it. It's a more of a viscous type feel in your mouth, but it's good all the way through. If you read about it, they picked this cask out because there's a raisin taste to it. That's what they say. I'm not sure.
Do you detect that?
No, I don't. That's why I was.
I don't either.
Yeah, I'll give it.
I picked up, which it's really good, by the way. 1-2 scale, good, bad,
Yeah.
good. The first note I probably would call out would be honey.
I can taste that.
Now, what's also interesting about Scotch is I would describe it as drinking cleaner than bourbon, because it's kind of a one-note thing. You have malted barley. You don't have other things mixed in. And to me, it's always cleaner. It does not have the sweetness that bourbons do. Bourbons have the caramel, kind of a candied flavor to them. Yeah, and Scotches do not. And some people don't like it as a result of that, but to me, that makes Scotch what it is.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I would say this is a smoked orange taste to me.
Oh, interesting.
It's a fruit, but it's got more of the smoke taste to it. I don't detect peat in this at all, except maybe one could argue that smoke that I'm tasting is the peat. But it's got a little fruit to it, but like you're saying, it's not sweet at all. The finish is great. It lasts with you. It hangs in your mouth. It's more of a viscous.
In a good way.
Yeah, very good way. Very good way. But it hangs with you. It's also, comparing it to a bourbon, it's definitely more. It's more oily, more viscous. It has more body to it.
Yeah, and I think this is true of Scotches as well. From my standpoint, every Scotch has a back note of salt, and it's because it's literally in everything. They're on the ocean. It's an island in the ocean.
Yeah, it's a big
The
island.
wind is blowing. If you watch the Open Championship golf tournament, there's wind whipping all over the course.
Yeah, St. Andrews.
And so there's sea spray that's infused in everything. And so I think there's always a little bit of that sea salt flavor that's detected in every Scotch note.
It's that wine term that this southern tongue can never pronounce, the terroir.
Yeah.
Yeah, of winemaking, your terroir of you're above the fog line, things like that.
Right.
It's part of the terroir of Scotland is the sea.
So, when you talk about bourbon and whiskey makers, they're like, oh, it's the water. I mean, that's the thing. It's the water. And so if we're talking about Scotch, it's the water too. It's just going to have a more of a salt background, or in the case of the peated Scotches, with that as well. So,
and I think that's why Macallan is located where they are. It's that Speyside River. They're located right by that river that historically has given them a fresh, clean supply of water.
Yeah.
So Macallan's also noted to be one of the oldest distillers in Scotland. So that kind of goes along with you. If your company's existed for, it was one of the first companies to be legally registered in Scotland. And so if you have 100-year history, it helps to have that history to be able to bottle 60-year-old Scotch.
yeah, and let's take note, because we drink a lot of American whiskey, bourbon, Scotch, or bourbon and whiskey and American, all that. I mean, the most that's going to be is, 250 years old. I mean, they were making this stuff in the 1400s.
Right. I mean, that's the difference in general between America and Europe, right? We say something that's old, it'd say, well, it's really ancient. It goes back to the Civil War, 1865.
Right.
But that they're just getting started in Europe at that point. I mean, we're getting started. They've been going for a long time. They've been producing all sorts of stuff at that time.
So speaking of aged and that type of thing, relative to American history, the mantel that we're sitting in front of was used in 1794 out of the Donaldson home to remarry, at that time, Army officer Andrew Jackson to his wife, Rachel Donaldson. And you had done a little bit of homework, because we knew it was the remarriage, and we knew there was some controversy around that. So
yeah.
Describe what happened there.
So, you got to remember so put some dates to it. That Andrew Jackson, Rachel Donaldson were officially remarried 1794. At the time, Tennessee wasn't a state. Tennessee became a state in 96. So Rachel was originally married to a guy, Louis Robards, in Kentucky. Kentucky was a state at that time. History doesn't say kind things about Mr. Robard. Regardless, Rachel left him and went back down to her family's house, the Donaldson farm. The Donaldsons were one of the original founders here in Nashville. Robertson came over by land. Rachel's dad came over by flatboat. Intentionally met up here in Nashboro on the rivers of the Cumberland, on the banks of the Cumberland, and they founded Nashville. And so they had the Donaldson farm, and that's where. And it was at that point they had borders. That's where Andrew Jackson came through. He stayed
So you say she left her first husband. So they got divorced.
They got divorced, but it was not. This is exactly. They thought they got divorced, and that therein lies the problem. Because we're talking. Things weren't really official back then. So supposedly Louis Robards filed for divorce, but it was never granted. Now, they didn't know that. Rachel didn't know that at the time. Neither did Andrew Jackson. So fast forward.
So they say.
So they say, whatever. And so fast forward, they come to, she comes to what would later become Nashville. Wasn't Nashville at that point. They met and they were officially married they got married in 1791. But then in 1793 or thereabouts, they found out, the divorce was never granted back in Kentucky. And I should say, to be accurate, somebody will point this out to me. They actually got married the first time down in Natchez, Mississippi, which was at the time a Spanish land. It wasn't the state of Mississippi. They got married down there. And then comes 1793, the divorce was granted up in Kentucky. And so Andrew Jackson, being a young political figure, later be elected to state of representatives for Tennessee, would be the state of Tennessee. So they got remarried in 1794 at the Donaldson farm.
In front of this mantel.
In front of this mantel. That's right. So there's the history.
And in talking to the owner of the Standard Club.
Josh Smith, yep.
Yeah, he noted that it has had two residences, one in the Donaldson home and then here.
Correct.
And so it has been here since they're not sure, but this house was built in 1843. So it's very possible around then that it was moved. I don't know if it was then or 100 years later.
Yeah, the documentation like that doesn't flow exactly. They didn't really care back then. But that's the kind of the neat thing about this club. It has some neat history to it. Granted, it doesn't have the history of Scotland and Macallan, but it's pretty cool nonetheless.
Yeah, so let's taste the 18 years. So we're moving into the aged statement whiskeys. And fortunately, we've both had the opportunity to taste these in the past because you've shared them with me.
Yeah. Oh, this is good stuff. Now, the good news, bad news with Macallan is you can actually go and get this. Like, you can go down to Total Wine or your favorite store, and you can pick this up. That's good news. It's not like Pappy you won't find on the shelf, and it's not necessarily quote unquote allocated. The bad news, it's going to cost you. The store has a higher retail price for this than pretty much any bourbon you would buy off the shelf. Not to say you wouldn't pay this much for a Pappy, but with a Pappy, you're buying it from some third-hand, second-hand person. This, you're buying it directly from a retailer, and it just retails for a bunch.
Yeah, and I just tasted this 18-year, and I think it does have that citrus-forward flavor. I detect the notes of honey as well. I think what's interesting, and maybe it's the nature of scotches, is it does really have a full mouthfeel. I would compare it to like 100 proof bourbon in terms of the way it drinks, the way it feels and tastes in your mouth. Whereas if you were tasting a 86 proof whiskey, it would be thinner, it would not have as much flavor, and this is remarkable in its flavor that you taste.
You're right. This does not have your typical burn as it goes down, flavor to it. This is like a high proof bourbon. This is. And you said it, I like your word. It's very clean. It's crisp. Again, I would go with that smoked orange taste. Very viscous in your taste, in your mouth, and it lasts with you. This is a good sipping bourbon here. I know it's not bourbon, but I would call it.
I don't know that you and I have agreed on so much in this time frame on anything in the entire time we've known each other.
Yeah, that's right. All 22 years. So yeah, this is this is why you like Scotch. Maybe we have to ditch the whole bourbon thing. Well, it's becoming more and more people are ditching bourbon, right?
Well, great point, because that's really, we did want to touch on the fact that we had both been doing some homework. My daughter said, hey, the bourbon boom is over. And I said, what are you talking about? She said, yeah, other things are becoming more popular. And she's in the industry, so she would have some knowledge on the subject. And I knew just from anecdotally talking to people that rum is becoming really more popular.
Tequila.
Chris Nishan, who was on our podcast, he's a big rum drinker. But tequila is the fastest growing alcoholic spirit that's out there. And it has doubled the growth of bourbon in terms of consumption. But alcohol consumption across the board, without fail, has declined since the pandemic.
Yeah, well, there's been so many celebrity promotions for tequila. And of course, celebrities know everything. They are all wise. And we should listen to all their recommendations for our vote.
Yes.
And tequila. And so if you listen to your favorite celebrity, you're going to be drinking tequila.
Wait, that was sarcasm, right?
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
I was trying to leave it on pretty heavy there if you didn't catch it on. But yeah, bourbon sales, I mean, they've always kind of cycled. The big cycle was, of course, Prohibition. But, it's gone up and down. And so now it's going down. Brown-Forman laid off 12% of their workforce recently, and they sold their cooperage. Now, cooperage is a fancy word for barrel making, but they sold their barrel making.
Or close it?
They sold it.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure they sold it too.
So you have to assume someone else may be making barrels.
Or they basically took, yes, that's a safe assumption, or they took the barrel making and they decide to use those things to make other stuff. I mean, who knows?
Yeah, and there's a glut, and I think Brown-Forman, their CEO, who has recently been replaced, their chairman has been replaced. So I think, this is not anecdotal. The statistics back up the fact that, yes, alcohol consumption has declined across the country, and now we're talking one of the biggest companies in the industry who is laying off workforce, changing their leadership. And in the state of Kentucky, there are 14.3 million barrels full and aging in a rick house right now.
And that's the largest ever inventory they've ever held.
Yeah.
I mean, so you think, well, Kentucky has a lot of bourbon. Maybe 14 million barrels is not that much. But no, it's the largest amount of bourbon they've ever had stored.
So you do have to think they've got a little bit of a glut, and that's going to impact price.
We hope so. Hopefully it'll come down.
Right. So if the demand is lower, and I think what we're seeing, the demographic group that is consuming less alcohol than ever before is the 18 to 34. Now, note, the 18 to 21 subgroup is not legal.
That's correct. Yeah, you can't officially track that.
But that demographic that is tracked for everything, television viewing, movie watching, the whole thing, they are either abstaining or they are doing what we are.
Drinking other stuff.
Well, they could be drinking other stuff, but alcohol consumption overall has declined. So they're drinking in moderation. They're sitting like we are on a porch, tasting. They're not, hey, let's have a party and get drunk. I'm sure that still takes place. But I think what we're seeing is more of a...
appreciation?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And so, because one piece of the market that has not changed is the high end, what we're drinking, what we've had on the show before. The market for that is just ravenous.
And to your point, Brown-Forman's a huge company. I mean, that's the who's who of bourbons. And so if a company like that is laying off 12% of their workforce and selling their cooperage, that's got to scare the smaller distillers out there. I
absolutely.
mean, 20 years ago, you couldn't put out bourbon fast enough. If you wanted to make a buck, you would open up your own distillery, market your bourbon, and it was almost guaranteed to do well. Those guys have got to be a little scared if they see the big boys running for cover. What are they going to do?
Yeah, and so back to that, you have to wonder, there are going to be new tariffs put in place that Scotch is going to be subject to, and so you would think the price hike would impact that. It may not. It may stay where it is.
It's hard to imagine it get much higher. I mean,
yeah, exactly. So, as we talk about that, let's drink the next iteration of the Macallan. So we've got the 25 and 30 year, and these, you're right, you can go buy them in a store. This is $2,500 a bottle.
Yeah, you're going to pay for this. And appropriately, we put the 25 and 30-year-old Scotch here in the standard glasses. Here
on
again,
the nose, that's amazing.
Oh, so thank you again to Josh and the Standard Club for hosting us here.
Yeah, what are you picking up when you first put your nose in the glass there?
Plum.
That's
It's a fruity plum.
Yeah, that's a good note. I wouldn't have said that.
When was the last time you ate a plum?
Well, that's exactly the point. Yeah, an amazing finish. I watched a documentary recently called Somm.
Yeah,
which
great,
is
great wine.
Yeah, and so it's a process through which people can become sommeliers, and there are various grades of being a sommelier. And this subject of this were people who wanted to be a master somm, and they describe things, in a very loquacious, to use a word that you've used earlier, in a loquacious way. And one of the things they talked about is you really do have to go to markets and smell things and flowers and taste things and what dried fruit tastes like relative to. And so you mentioned plum, and I wouldn't have thought that because I'm not eating plums often enough. And so, getting a palate for this, I think some people are naturally inclined to that. My daughter can pick up notes. I don't, but I think I can learn. Maybe this dog can be taught new tricks.
That's right. Well, and that's part of the experience is you expand your boundaries. You taste different things, but just like if you if you go out to a national park and you just drive through it and don't look around, you're not going to see much, but you'll miss the Grand Canyon when you do that. By doing this and stopping and thinking about it, just thinking about it. I mean, even I've learned a lot in this process. I mean, as I'm sitting here, I'm looking at the color. You can tell this is a higher proof because you can see it coming down the sides of the glass, the whole tiers or legs or whatever you call it. It's a stronger proof than our last episode. We tasted the bonded. That's 100 proof or 50% alcohol. This is higher than this, so this has more drippings down. I bet if I shake the bottle, it'll beat up.
These are actually a little lower.
Oh, lower, excuse me.
Yeah, so that's 100 proof. These are 86 proof.
Oh, I misunderstood. Okay, so never mind with that. But so I guess maybe that.
I was about to ask you if you're an expert. I guess that.
No, I'm trying to learn.
Right
my whole point in this soapbox thing is you learn in this process. So there you go. Your legs and your beating are not as accurate as you might think it would be. But wow, the nose, the finish, the Scotch really has a cleaner finish to it.
Yes.
This compared to our 18 and rare cask, I taste more the smoke in it. It's a stronger peat in there for some reason.
Yeah, and I don't detect that, but it certainly is a more full flavored Scotch than the 18. It tastes like it's been in a barrel longer. Yeah. There's more oak or cask flavored, and it's interesting. We're talking cask as opposed to barrels. Much like we say, all bourbon is whiskey. Not all whiskey is bourbon.
Correct.
So all barrels are casks. Not all casks are barrels. So cask is the general term for a wood, barreled shaped device that ages alcohol. And there are different sizes, barrel being one of those. So I don't know how large the casks are, but they are limited in the size in which they're aged to make sure it does get the wood flavors around that.
I don't know the answer to this question, but it'd be interesting to see what their rick houses, I know they don't call them rick houses over there.
Right.
But what do their rick houses look like? And because in Scotland it gets really cold there, I wonder how that helps or hurts their aging process.
Yeah, that's a good note. I think we talk about we've made a field trip down the street to the Standard Club. I guess the ultimate field trip is we're going to go on a Scotch.
Oh, I like that idea. Yeah,
We're
a
going to
Scottish
Scotland.
tour. Yeah,
Woo!
yeah. There you go. I like that idea. Maybe get a little bird hunting in there, estate shooting as well.
Yeah.
A little golf.
So let me ask you this. So I'm sitting here as a consumer, and I hear that statement around the fact that alcohol consumption has declined. I mean, I think, well, that's a good thing. I mean, I respect the fact that it's being consumed more in moderation. I like the fact that, and my son fits that age group. He's 25 years old, and he and his friends will sit and taste. They're not, and they'll smoke cigars. It's kind of their thing, and maybe because my son watched me doing that, that seemed like that's the normal thing to do. But I'm curious as to maybe how that happened, but I'm appreciative of the fact that that's happening.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think maybe the younger generation has a little more wisdom, that not to get completely blitzed out of their mind. When we were growing up, it was the cool thing to do of, oh man, I got so drunk. But man, being drunk is overrated. I mean, one, it's dangerous. Two, you feel like crap afterwards. I mean, why did we do that to ourselves? That was kind of stupid, right? I mean, that's, sticking the fork into the socket. You won't do that again. But, so maybe the younger generation does have some insight that we didn't have.
Yeah. And, you think about guys coming back from World War II, alcoholism was prevalent, to deal with the PTSD, Vietnam similarly. And so you had other spirits that increased in popularity through the 70s. And so I think we've just entered an era where that group has died out or aging out. And so we are seeing a younger generation that drinks more in moderation. And they would certainly have an appreciation for what we're drinking. And so as a result, let's move on to the 30-year. I mean, this is the pinnacle of Scotch right here.
Yes, this is.
I mean, this warrants.
This is pretty good. Cheers.
Yeah, absolutely.
To a great podcast and many more to come.
Yes, 100%. Yeah, it's funny. I don't know, because I had a cigar in my mouth a second ago. I don't detect the nose on this like I did the 25-year. It doesn't seem to be as pungent's not the right word, because that would denote something unpleasant. But yeah, it's not as forward on the notes as I smell it. What are you picking up?
Yeah, I somewhat agree with that. I mean, it's still got that fruity nose. It's still got that full mouth, not quite oily, but more toward the oily scale than the watery scale. It
agree with
flavors the mouth. It fills the mouth. It has a full mouth taste, to use the jargon, or whatever. But yeah, it's not as, I'm surprised it's not as smoky as the 25. The smoke has mellowed out, or peat, wherever you want to call it, but it's good. It's very good.
Yeah, and what's interesting about this is I think we've tasted exactly what the 25 is like if it were aged longer. Yeah. Which is exactly what happened.
Yeah, same mash bill,
yes.
same recipe, just let it cook a little longer.
Yeah, and that's exactly what happened. So it tastes a little more mature, a little more full-bodied. It's got more character. Yeah, it's really exceptional.
Yeah, this is you take that drink, that sip, and it stays with you in a good way. It lingers in your mouth. It fills the mouth, and the My Father cigar is a perfect match to it, because the cigar, like I said, has a little sweet finish to it, and then you add the Scotch, and wow, that's a pretty good combination. We didn't plan it. We're not smart enough to plan it that way, but it turned out pretty good there.
Yeah, and I think I'm excited about the fact that alcohol consumption has. We say decline, but maybe it's moved in a direction more of what we do. And so we hope you, listening and watching us, have the opportunity to do what we're doing and taste some amazing whiskey with us, and maybe try some Scotch. Venture out a little bit.
Absolutely. And, speaking of venture out, we have the bourbon, or not, excuse me, is it bourbon from India? Is it bourbon or Scotch?
It's whiskey.
Whiskey, excuse me, you're right. We have that. We want to do some venturing out as well. I'm thinking about future episodes is what I'm doing. We have the whiskey from India. We have the very, very old Fitzgerald coming up. That was a bottle distilled under the tutelage of Pappy Van Winkle before Pappy was Pappy. It was Pappy back then, nicknamed him, but he didn't have the 23-year-old Pappy back then. This is before when he was working back with Old Fitzgerald and blending that. So we have some great bottlings, tastings coming up.
Yeah, and I think what we're going to end up doing, regardless of the topic we have, is we're going to have an opportunity to taste some things together that we've tried in the past, and we will put ourselves on the line again with some blind taste test, but we're going to limit it to 3 or 4. We're going to know what they are, but we're going to try to pick them out from each other and see if we have any clue as to what we're talking about.
So before we end, I think people who are watching us would want to know, is the 25-year-old worth the $3,000, and is the 30-year worth the $5,000? Is it worth the extra $2,000?
No.
Wow, that's a hard definitive no.
Yeah, I would say no. It is better. I would say that without question. The 30 year is better than the 25. But in terms of value, I think the 25 is the cream of the crop of what we've had today.
So it's better than the 18.
Yeah, it's appreciably better than the 18. I think the rare cask is good. And I would put it on par with the 18. I think, you've got a non-age statement whiskey that's really good, and I would put those on par with each other. I think, to me, the star of the show, particularly in terms of value, is the 25 year. I think the 30 is better, but not so much that I'm going to go pay more for it. Yeah. I wouldn't. What do you think?
I agree with you, but I would even go so much to say the 18 is very close to the 25. That the difference between the 25 and the 18 is that 25 has a better finish, and what stays with you is better. It has it's more of that smoke, smooth, plum finish. I didn't taste the raisin in the rare cask, so maybe I'm missing it. To me, it was that smoked orange taste that really sticks with you.
Yeah, I think you're right. Well, thank you, guys. Join us, Two Guys on a Porch.
Remember to like and subscribe, twoguysonaporch.com. Thank you for hanging out with us, and come back and visit us with the next episode.
Life is much better with friends, a drink, and cigar, and some Two Guys on a Porch swag.
Let us know what your drink and cigar of choice is at twoguysonaporch.com, and you'll be entered into a drawing to get some Two Guys on a Porch swag